Steel containers baked under the Texas sun, rows of them stretching to the horizon like a metallic graveyard. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the asphalt, and the constant drone of machinery filled the humid air. Inside one unremarkable container among thousands, $20 million in cartel cash waited to disappear into the Texas night. Miguel Alvarez was just another invisible dock worker making $15 an hour, one of hundreds of men in fluorescent safety vests who moved through the industrial maze like worker ants. Essential but overlooked, forgotten the moment they clocked out. But tonight, Miguel was about to pull off the most audacious theft in cartel history and vanish without a trace. Miguel Alvarez, 39, was invisible in the way working-class men often are. He'd grown up in Baytown, Texas, where smokestacks ruled the skyline, and most men either left for college or worked until their bodies broke. Miguel never had the first option. His father died in a plant accident when he was 16, leaving medical debt that wiped out the family savings. His mother's diabetes made college impossible. For 2 decades, Miguel drifted through hard jobs, construction sites under the brutal Texas sun, oil fields where men disappeared into the machinery of profit, warehouses that chewed up workers and spat them out. Each job ended the same way: layoffs, automation, or promises of advancement that never materialized. The Port of Houston offered something different when Miguel was hired 3 years earlier: stability. The pay was decent, $15 an hour with overtime opportunities that could push weekly earnings above $700. The work was steady, with enough variety to prevent the mind-numbing boredom of previous warehouse jobs. Most importantly, the port operated 24 hours a day, creating shift differentials and overtime premiums that made survival possible in a city where rent consumed 60% of most workers' income. Miguel worked the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., operating cranes and forklifts that moved shipping containers between trucks, trains, and cargo vessels. The Port of Houston handled more than 200,000 containers monthly, each representing international commerce worth millions collectively. The scale was overwhelming: 36 miles of ship channel, more than 200 private terminals, cargo movements that never stopped flowing through the industrial maze. But Miguel was drowning in an ocean of financial obligations. After taxes, child support for his 8-year-old daughter Sophia, $800 monthly, his diabetic mother's nursing home care, $300, rent, utilities, car payments, and basic living expenses, he typically had less than $100 monthly for emergencies. He lived in constant terror of financial catastrophe: a car breakdown, medical emergency, or any disruption that would trigger a cascade of unpayable debts. Meanwhile, wealth flowed through his hands daily. The port was a conduit for international commerce worth billions annually. Container ships arrived from Asia carrying consumer goods destined for Walmart and Amazon warehouses. Oil tankers departed for Europe, loaded with refined petroleum. And hidden within this legitimate commerce was a parallel economy that Miguel had begun to notice during his second year of employment. The first sign had been containers that bypassed normal inspection procedures. Every shipping container entering Houston was supposed to follow established protocols: customs inspections, manifest reviews, weight verifications, security screenings designed to prevent smuggling, terrorism, and tax evasion. But certain containers moved through the system with minimal scrutiny, processed by supervisors who seemed unusually eager to expedite their handling. These special containers arrived on specific ships, always during overnight shifts when federal inspection teams operated with skeleton crews. The containers were marked with legitimate shipping company logos and carried proper documentation, but experienced dock workers recognized subtle differences in their handling procedures. Miguel learned to identify these containers through details invisible to casual observers. The paperwork was always perfect, too perfect, with none of the minor discrepancies, corrections, or irregular stamps that characterize legitimate international shipping. Container numbers followed patterns that didn't match coding systems used by major shipping lines. Most importantly, the containers were handled by specific crews who rotated assignments to ensure no single worker observed too many special movements. Miguel had glimpsed inside one during a scheduling conflict when regular supervisors were unavailable. Instead of declared industrial machinery, the container held dozens of wooden crates secured with steel bands and warning labels in Spanish. The crates were uniform, professionally constructed, and heavier than their dimensions suggested. Senior dock worker Carlos quickly closed the container and moved it to a different area, warning Miguel, "Some things are better left alone." We move what's on the manifest, no questions asked. That's how we keep our jobs. Through careful observation and overheard conversations, Miguel learned the truth. The Port of Houston was a money laundering facility for Mexican cartels. Drugs traveled north through established smuggling routes, generating enormous profits that needed conversion into assets that could move through legitimate financial systems. Cash was bulky, difficult to transport, and impossible to deposit without triggering federal reporting requirements. The solution was moving cash through ports where it could be disguised as trade payments, export revenues, or business transactions that appeared legitimate to regulatory authorities. Houston was ideal because of its enormous legitimate volume, millions of transactions providing perfect camouflage for criminal financial flows. Southbound containers carried cash, probably hundreds of thousands or millions per container, vacuum sealed and disguised as legitimate cargo. The money would be transported to Mexico, where it could purchase assets, pay bribes, or fund operations without creating electronic records American law enforcement could trace. Miguel estimated he observed these special containers approximately twice monthly, usually during weekend shifts when federal oversight was minimal. If each carried $5 million, the cartel was laundering at least $10 million monthly through Houston alone. The operation was sophisticated, well organized, and protected by corruption extending throughout the port's administrative structure. Security guards were paid to ignore irregularities. Supervisors received bonuses for expediting certain shipments. Federal inspectors were systematically avoided through scheduling manipulations and bureaucratic delays. Miguel was earning $15 an hour to facilitate an operation moving millions every week. March 2020 brought a perfect storm of disasters that would push Miguel beyond rational decision-making. His mother was hospitalized with diabetic complications requiring emergency surgery. The procedure was successful, but recovery required extended rehabilitation in a private facility, providing better care than her standard nursing home. The additional cost, $2,000 monthly for at least 6 months, money Miguel didn't have and couldn't borrow. Simultaneously, his car was repossessed when he fell behind on payments after using car payment money to cover his mother's medical expenses. Without reliable transportation, Miguel faced losing his job at the port, which would trigger a cascade of financial disasters: eviction, defaulted child support, and his mother's return to substandard medical care. Then Carmen called with news that shattered what remained of Miguel's composure. Sophia needed dental work costing $1,500. The child's insurance covered basic procedures, but Sophia required orthodontic treatment considered cosmetic rather than medically necessary. Carmen's new husband was willing to pay, but Carmen wanted Miguel to contribute as a matter of paternal responsibility. Miguel spent 3 months studying the operation. He learned a particularly valuable shipment was scheduled for July 7th, approximately $20 million in a container supposedly carrying industrial pump equipment to Veracruz, Mexico. It would remain in temporary storage for 40 hours before transport to the Mexican border. His strategy was elegant: replace the entire container with an identical decoy filled with worthless cargo. The theft wouldn't be discovered until the container reached Mexico days later. By then, Miguel would be hundreds of miles away. He acquired an empty container from the scrap area, spent weeks modifying its appearance, reproducing shipping logos and identification numbers. He filled it with scrap metal and concrete blocks to match the weight. His cousin Roberto agreed to help move equipment for $5,000, asking no questions. Miguel rented a warehouse 20 miles from the port, paying 6 months in advance. July 7th, 11:47 p.m. The Port of Houston operated under a canopy of sodium lights that turned the industrial landscape into an orange-tinted maze of shadows and brilliant illumination. A summer thunderstorm was building over the Gulf of Mexico, sending occasional lightning flashes across the sky and filling the air with humid electricity that preceded heavy rain. Miguel had been monitoring the target container since its arrival 6 hours earlier. The container sat in Storage Area C, a section designated for temporary storage of containers awaiting ground transportation. The area was secured by chain-link fencing and monitored by security cameras. But the overnight shift operated with minimal staffing and guards more concerned with preventing intrusion than observing routine cargo movements. To casual observers, the container appeared identical to legitimate cargo, containing machinery, consumer goods, or raw materials destined for international markets. But Miguel knew that inside this unremarkable metal box were vacuum-sealed packages containing approximately $20 million in United States currency, small denomination bills bundled with rubber bands, heat-sealed in plastic, and arranged on wooden pallets that could be moved with standard forklift equipment. At midnight, Miguel began his routine shift duties, operating a crane that moved containers between storage areas and transportation staging zones. His work assignment included Storage Area C, providing legitimate access to the section where the target container was located. Miguel had arranged his shift schedule months in advance to ensure he would be working when the container arrived, using vacation days and shift swaps to create the perfect opportunity. Miguel's plan required precise timing, coordinated with the predictable patterns of port security. The overnight guards conducted roving patrols every 30 minutes, following established routes that took them away from Storage Area C for approximately 15 minutes during each cycle. Security cameras covered main access roads and entry points, but created blind spots in areas where routine cargo movements wouldn't attract attention. At 12:23 a.m., Miguel used his crane to lift the target container from its designated storage location. To anyone observing, this appeared to be routine cargo movement. Containers were frequently repositioned during overnight shifts to accommodate arriving shipments or prepare for morning transportation schedules. Miguel transported the container to a maintenance area behind Building 7, a section used for equipment repairs and temporary storage of materials needed for routine operations. This area was poorly lit, rarely visited during overnight shifts, and shielded from direct observation by larger buildings and equipment. Working quickly but carefully, Miguel used a portable forklift to move his prepared decoy container into position. The decoy was identical in appearance to the original. Same dimensions, same markings, same apparent weight. Miguel had practiced this container swap dozens of times during previous shifts, timing each movement and memorizing the precise procedures needed to complete the exchange without attracting attention. At 12:41 a.m., Miguel lifted the decoy container with his crane and transported it to the original storage location in Area C. The substitution was complete. The decoy now occupied the position designated for the cartel's cash shipment, while the real container containing $20 million was hidden in the maintenance area. Miguel resumed normal work duties, moving other containers and completing routine tasks that justified his presence throughout the port facility. Security cameras recorded his activities, but showed only a conscientious employee performing standard overnight operations. At 2:15 a.m., during a scheduled break in the security patrol pattern, Miguel used a different forklift to move the stolen container from the maintenance area to a loading dock where his cousin Roberto waited with a flatbed truck. The loading process took 8 minutes, longer than Miguel had hoped, but still within acceptable parameters for avoiding detection. Roberto asked no questions about the container's contents or Miguel's reasons for needing immediate transportation. He had agreed to help his cousin move equipment to a storage facility, accepting payment of $5,000 cash without requiring detailed explanations about the cargo's nature or legal status. At 2:31 a.m., the truck departed the port of Houston, carrying $20 million in stolen cartel money. Miguel returned to his shift duties, completing his work assignment and clocking out at 7 a.m. as scheduled. To all observers, he had worked a normal overnight shift, moving containers and performing routine operations documented by time cards, equipment logs, and security footage. The theft was perfect in its invisibility. The decoy container would be loaded onto a truck Thursday morning and transported to Mexico, where the substitution wouldn't be discovered until the container was opened at its final destination. By that time, Miguel would be hundreds of miles away, and the trail connecting him to the theft would be impossible to follow. At the warehouse, Miguel found exactly what he expected. Wooden pallets stacked with vacuum-sealed packages. Each contained approximately $100,000 in mixed bills. $20 million total, more money than most people earn in their lifetimes, but also a death sentence if discovered. Miguel divided the money, $15 million for himself, $5 million for Roberto's assistance and silence. Roberto was shocked but practical. Asking questions served no purpose. By dawn, the warehouse was cleaned, the container being transported to a scrapyard for destruction. Miguel had planned his disappearance with systematic attention. He drove south through Texas toward Mexico, following commercial traffic routes. At San Antonio, he transferred money to a rental car reserved with false identification. Crossing into Mexico at Laredo, he presented himself as a construction contractor investigating business opportunities. Once in Mexico, he paid smuggling networks $100,000 for passage to Guatemala, then Honduras, a country where government authority was limited and cash purchased complete invisibility. By July 15, 8 days after the theft, Miguel had settled in a mountain town near the Salvadoran border. He purchased a modest house with cash, establishing himself as an American businessman investing in local agriculture. His Spanish was fluent, his money provided credibility, and his new documentation was sophisticated enough for routine inquiries. The cartel discovered the theft July 10th when their container arrived in Veracruz filled with scrap metal. The discovery triggered immediate crisis response. Initial assumptions blamed internal betrayal, leading to systematic interrogations and disappearances of Mexican port workers. Within 72 hours, investigators determined the theft occurred in Houston. El Contador, the accountant who specialized in tracking missing money, led the manhunt. Security footage analysis revealed irregularities in container positioning. Miguel was identified when records showed he operated the crane and had access during the critical period. But Miguel had vanished. His apartment was empty, cleaned of belongings. El Contador's team interrogated Miguel's ex-wife, co-workers, neighbors. Carmen truthfully reported Miguel's financial struggles, but knew nothing of criminal plans. Cousin Roberto was kidnapped and tortured, but survived by providing partial information, admitting to moving a container he believed contained legitimate cargo. The cartel released him after breaking bones and damaging his hearing permanently, sending a message to other potential accomplices. The FBI became involved when intelligence sources reported unusual cartel activity. Agent Maria Santos led the federal task force, but faced immediate obstacles. The theft showed professional skill with minimal evidence. The cartel couldn't report the crime without admitting money laundering activities. Miguel was identified as a person of interest, but circumstantial evidence wasn't sufficient for charges. When his escape crossed international borders, jurisdictional issues arose. The FBI couldn't pursue suspects in countries without extradition treaties. After 18 months, the investigation transferred to cold case status. The final report concluded an unknown person had stolen undetermined money from a Mexican criminal organization and likely fled the United States.